On the crisp, overcast morning of October 16, 1983, the parking lot of the Grace Community Chapel in Falls Church, Virginia, was filling up with the predictable rhythm of a suburban Sunday. Station wagons and sedans, mostly American-made, crunched over the gravel as families in their Sunday best hurried toward the double oak doors. It was a scene of quintessential Americana, the kind of image the Reagan administration projected to the world: pious, orderly, and peaceful. Inside, the air smelled of floor wax and old paper. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through the stained glass, illuminating the rows of wooden pews that had held the same families for generations. To an outsider, this was simply a place of worship. But to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and particularly to the Counterintelligence Division operating out of the J. Edgar Hoover building just 10 miles away, Falls Church was something else entirely. It was a bedroom community for the intelligence community. Sitting in the pews of Grace Community Chapel were men and women who, during the week, held some of the highest security clearances in the United States government. There were analysts from the CIA, logistics officers from the Pentagon, and encryption specialists from the NSA. They sang hymns, they prayed for the sick, and they shook hands during the passing of the peace, all while carrying secrets that could alter the balance of nuclear power. And on this particular Sunday, sitting in the third row from the back near the aisle, was a man who knew exactly who they were. To the congregation, he was William "Bill" Tucker, a quiet, polite, freelance technical writer who had moved to the area 6 months prior. He was always well-dressed in a tweed jacket, always put a $10 bill in the collection plate, and always listened with rapt attention. But Bill Tucker did not exist. The man in the pew was actually Colonel Valery Petrov, a sleeper agent of the KGB's Directorate S, the illegals program. He had spent 4 years in a mock American town in central Russia, perfecting his accent, his mannerisms, and his backstory before being deployed to the heart of the enemy's capital. His mission was not to steal documents himself, but to spot potential targets, to identify the weak links among the pious. He was a hunter, and this church was his hunting ground. He had successfully integrated himself into the community, joining the men's breakfast group and volunteering for the autumn charity drive. He was, by all metrics of tradecraft, invisible, a perfect ghost. However, espionage is a game of details, and the human mind, no matter how well trained, relies on patterns. Valery Petrov had memorized the baseball statistics of the Washington Senators. He knew the price of milk. He could debate the merits of Ford versus Chevy. He had studied the Bible too, viewing it as a manual for cultural camouflage rather than a spiritual text. But there are things that cannot be learned in a classroom in Moscow. There are rhythms to a culture that are felt, not memorized. Reverend Elias Thorne, the pastor of Grace Community Chapel, was a man of 62 with a voice like gravel and eyes that had seen too much. Before he was a man of the cloth, Thorne had been a chaplain in the Marine Corps. He had served in Korea. He understood the nature of men, and he understood the nature of deception. He had welcomed Bill Tucker into the flock, but something about the man, a certain stiffness, a too perfect recitation of social pleasantries, had always sat uneasily in the back of the Reverend's mind. On this Sunday, Reverend Thorne had prepared a sermon titled "The Wolf in the Fold." It was intended to be a theological reflection on moral vigilance. He had no idea that by the time he said amen, he would have triggered a chain of events that would end in a federal raid, a diplomatic crisis, and the destruction of a carefully constructed life. It wasn't the theology that would catch the spy. It was the ritual. To understand the magnitude of the mistake that was about to happen, we must first understand the man who called himself William Tucker. The KGB's Directorate S was legendary for its patience. While other intelligence services might rush an agent into the field, the Soviets played the long game. Valery Petrov had been selected for this mission in 1976. He was 34 years old at the time of his selection, a man chosen for his forgettable face and his extraordinary memory. The psychological profile in his KGB file described him as obsessive, isolated, and relentlessly disciplined. These were not traits that made for a happy life, but they were the exact traits required for a deep-cover illegal. For 2 years, Petrov lived in the Zone, a restricted military facility designed to mimic an American mid-sized city. He spoke only English. He watched American television shows recorded via satellite. He ate hamburgers and apple pie. He learned to walk like an American. looser in the hips, hands in pockets, and he learned to think like one. The legend, the intelligence term for a cover identity, created for him was watertight. William Tucker was born in Boise, Idaho in 1943. The real William Tucker had died in a car accident at the age of 4, a grim but common practice in identity theft for espionage. The KGB had forged high school transcripts, baptismal records, and even created a fictional employment history with a defunct publishing house in Seattle. When Petrov arrived in the United States in 1981, entering through Canada on a tourist visa before becoming Tucker, he spent the first year simply existing. He moved to Chicago, then to Cleveland, establishing a paper trail of rent checks and utility bills. By the time he settled in Falls Church in early 1983, he was, on paper, a boring, middle-aged bachelor looking for a quiet life. His target selection of Grace Community Chapel was not random. KGB analysts had identified the church as a hub for the families of the defense sector. The strategy was subtle. Tucker would not break into safes. He would befriend the lonely wife of a Pentagon official or the disgruntled analyst who felt underappreciated by his superiors. He would find the cracks in their personal lives and insert the wedge. Sunday mornings were his workday. He would arrive at 9:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the service. He would stand in the vestibule, drinking the weak coffee served in styrofoam cups, and engage in small talk. "Cold one out there today, Bill?" a deacon might say. "Sure is," Petrov would reply, his accent a flawless, flat Midwestern drawl. "Think it might snow by Tuesday." He was careful never to ask direct questions about work. That was the mark of an amateur. Instead, he listened. He listened for the sigh of exhaustion from the man who worked at the Naval Surface Warfare Center. He listened for the complaints about missed anniversaries due to emergency briefings. He cataloged this information in his mind, and later, in the dead of night, he would encrypt it into burst transmissions sent via shortwave radio from a transmitter hidden in the false bottom of his toolbox. By October 1983, Petrov felt secure. He had been accepted. He was no longer the stranger. He was Bill from the third row. He had even been invited to Thanksgiving dinner by the family of a cryptographer from the State Department. This invitation was the golden ticket he had been working toward, but the stress of the double life was a constant, corrosive acid. Petrov lived in a state of perpetual hypervigilance. Every siren made his heart hammer. Every wrong number on the telephone felt like a code he had missed. To cope, he adhered to the routine of the church service with a fanaticism that surpassed actual religious devotion. He knew when to stand, when to sit, when to kneel. He had studied the Methodist hymnal. Though this was a non-denominational chapel, the liturgy was similar. Until he knew the lyrics better than the choir, he believed he had mastered the role. He believed that acting was simply a matter of perfect replication. He did not understand that a church is not a script. It is a living organism with unwritten rules, shared histories, and inside jokes that no amount of study in a Russian bunker could replicate. Reverend Elias Thorne was a man who believed in the specific over the general. His sermons were never vague platitudes. They were grounded in the dirt and reality of his congregation's lives. He knew that half the men in his pews were worried about the Soviet SS-20 missiles in Europe, and the other half were worried about their clearance reviews. Thorne prepared his sermons in a study lined with books, the smell of pipe tobacco clinging to the curtains. On this particular week, the text was from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 15. "Beware of false prophets, which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves." It was a standard text, often used to warn against heresy. But Thorne had a different angle in mind. He wanted to talk about the nature of authenticity. He had been thinking about the community, about how the suburbs of Washington, D.C. were a place where everyone wore a mask. The security clearance system required it. People couldn't talk about their work. They couldn't talk about their fears. They were all, in a sense, acting. As the organ music swelled, a rendition of "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," Thorne stepped up to the pulpit. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked out over the sea of faces. He saw the usual suspects: Mrs. Gable in her hat, the Johnson family with their restless toddler, and there, in the third row, Bill Tucker, sitting with his hands folded neatly in his lap, his expression one of polite anticipation. Thorne had an instinct about people. It was something he had developed in the foxholes of Korea. He could tell when a soldier was about to break, and he could tell when a man was hiding something. With Tucker, it wasn't a sense of danger exactly. It was a sense of vacancy. It was as if the man was a mirror reflecting back exactly what he thought you wanted to see. Thorne cleared his throat. "Good morning," he rumbled. "Good morning," the congregation replied in unison. "Today," Thorne began, "we speak of wolves, but not the wolves of the forest. We speak of the wolves that walk on two legs, the wolves that smile, the wolves that sit at our tables." In the third row, Valery Petrov kept his face neutral. Inside, he felt a flicker of cold amusement. "If only you knew, Reverend," he thought. "If only you knew how close the wolf really is." The sermon progressed. Thorne was a storyteller. He wove a narrative about a shepherd in ancient Judea who could distinguish his sheep not by their look, but by the way they reacted to his whistle. "You see," Thorne said, leaning over the pulpit, "the enemy can wear the skin of the sheep. The enemy can smell like the sheep. The enemy can even learn to bleat like the sheep. But the enemy cannot know the heart of the sheep." Petrov listened, nodding at the appropriate intervals. He had studied the concept of the Good Shepherd. It was a common Christian trope. He felt no anxiety. This was just metaphorical noise. Then Thorne shifted gears. He moved from the biblical text to a local tradition. This was the moment where the script would break. "It reminds me," Thorne said, a small smile touching his lips, "of the old red hymnal tradition we have here. You all remember, the Founders' Day service of 1968. A ripple of soft laughter went through the room. Petrov froze. He did not know what the red hymnal tradition was. He did not know what happened in 1968. He had arrived 6 months ago. His research had covered the church's financial records and the list of deacons, but it had not covered the oral history of a specific Sunday 15 years prior. He scanned the room peripherally. The people around him were smiling, some chuckling and shaking their heads. It was clearly a fond, shared memory of a blunder or a humorous event. Petrov's training kicked in. Mirror the group. He arranged his face into a pleasant smile. He chuckled softly. He nodded, as if to say, "Ah yes, the red hymnal." From the pulpit, Reverend Thorne was scanning the room, making eye contact with his flock to drive the point home. His eyes swept over the third row. He saw Mrs. Gable laughing. He saw the Johnsons smiling. And he saw Bill Tucker. Bill Tucker was smiling. Bill Tucker was nodding. And Reverend Thorne's blood ran cold. To understand why Thorne's blood ran cold, we must look at what actually happened in 1968. It was a story told often in the church, usually to new members during orientation, but it was essentially an inside joke. In 1968, the church had purchased a new set of hymnals. They were bright red. On the first Sunday they were used, a printing error was discovered. In the hymn Rock of Ages, the lyrics had been misprinted. Instead of "Let me hide myself in thee," the typo read, "Let me hide myself in tea." The congregation had dissolved into hysterics, and the service had to be stopped. Since then, the red hymnal story was shorthand for a moment of chaotic joy. But more importantly, it was a story of embarrassment. But here was the key. The church had burned those hymnals. They didn't exist anymore. Furthermore, whenever the story was told from the pulpit, the tradition was to groan, not to laugh. It was a mock-serious collective groan, a performance of, "Oh no, not that story again." Everyone in the room, even those who hadn't been there in '68, knew the social cue. The reverend would mention the red hymnal, the congregation would groan and roll their eyes good-naturedly, and then he would proceed. But Bill Tucker laughed. He laughed because he saw others smiling before the groan started. He had mistimed the reaction. But more than that, his laugh was genuine, polite amusement, not the performative exasperation of the group. It was a tiny thing, a micro-expression, a fraction of a second where the mask slipped not because of malice, but because of a lack of cultural data. Thorne paused for a split second, hardly noticeable to anyone else, but his mind was racing. He doesn't know, Thorne thought. He's pretending to know, but he doesn't know. Why would a man pretend to understand a local church in joke? A normal visitor would look confused. A normal new member might lean over to their neighbor and ask, "What's the red hymnal?" That was the honest human reaction: confusion. Deception, however, abhors confusion. Deception seeks to blend in. Deception nods and smiles and says, "Yes, I understand," because admitting ignorance draws attention. Thorne finished the sermon, but his heart wasn't in it. The wolf metaphor had suddenly become terrifyingly literal. He watched Tucker for the rest of the service. He noticed things he had ignored before. The way Tucker held the hymnal, perfectly level, never resting it on the pew in front. The way he stood for the doxology, snapping to attention almost like a soldier, rather than the lazy rise of the suburban dads around him. The service ended. The organ played the postlude. As the congregation shuffled out, Thorne stood at the door, shaking hands. This was the second test. The line moved slowly. "Great sermon, Reverend," said Mr. Henderson. "Thank you, Bob. How's the knee?" "Better, better." Then came Bill Tucker. He extended a hand. His grip was dry, firm, moderate, perfect. "Powerful message, Reverend," Tucker said, looking Thorne in the eye. "Really gave me a lot to think about regarding moral fortitude." "I'm glad, Bill," Thorne said, holding the handshake a fraction of a second too long. "I noticed you got a kick out of the red hymnal story." Petrov's internal alarms flared. This was a direct probe. Why is he asking? Did I react wrong? He had to recover. "Oh yes," Petrov said, his smile widening. It's a classic. Just the idea of it." "It certainly is," Thorne said, his voice level. "Though I always wonder if we should have kept one. You know, for posterity, instead of burying them." This was a trap. The hymnals hadn't been buried. They had been burned. It was a detail mentioned in every retelling. Petrov hesitated. He didn't know the history. He had to guess. If he disagreed, he might be wrong. If he agreed, he might be wrong. The safest play in his training was to agree with the authority figure. "Well," Petrov said, "sometimes it's best to bury the past, Reverend." Thorne smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed, Bill. Indeed. Have a blessed week." As Tucker walked away, descending the stone steps to the parking lot, Thorne turned to the head deacon, a man named Jim Miller. No relation to the agency. "Jim," Thorne said quietly, "do me a favor. Check the parish registry for Bill Tucker's previous church. He said he transferred his letter from a church in Seattle." "Sure, Reverend. Something wrong?" "I don't know," Thorne said, watching the beige sedan pull out of the lot. "I just get the feeling that Mr. Tucker is reading from a different script than the rest of us." Valery Petrov drove home with a knot in his stomach. The exchange at the door had felt wrong. Bury the past. Why had the Reverend said that? Petrov replayed the conversation in his mind, analyzing the tonal inflections, the body language. He returned to his rented townhouse in a development called Fox Run. It was a generic 2-story unit with beige carpet and white walls. He locked the door, checked the piece of clear tape he had placed on the bottom of the door frame. It was still intact, meaning no one had entered, and went to the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water. His hands were shaking slightly. "Paranoia," he told himself. "It is the occupational hazard. The priest is just a chatty old man. He probably forgot what happened to the books himself." But Petrov couldn't shake the feeling. He went to his study, which was furnished with a cheap desk and a bookshelf filled with technical manuals to support his cover as a writer. He pulled down a copy of Field and Stream, opened it to page 45, and used a razor blade to lift the corner of a photograph. Underneath was a series of numbers, his call schedule. He wasn't due to transmit for another 3 days. Breaking silence early was dangerous. It required setting up the long wire antenna in the attic, which increased the risk of detection by the FCC or the FBI's radio direction finding vans. He decided to wait. He would stick to the routine. That was the first rule of the illegals program. When in doubt, do nothing. Act normal. Meanwhile, at the church office, Reverend Thorne was making a phone call. He wasn't calling the police. Not yet. In the small towns of Virginia, the police were for traffic tickets and domestic disputes. For something like this, you called people you knew. Thorne dialed a number from an old address book. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Yeah? Frank, it's Elias Thorne." Frank Holloway was a retired FBI agent who had served as a liaison to the Marine Corps during Thorne's service. They played chess occasionally. Elias, to what do I owe the pleasure? You finally ready to admit I beat you last Tuesday? Not today, Frank. I have a hypothetical situation for you. I hate hypotheticals. They usually mean trouble. There's a man in my congregation, Thorne said, leaning back in his leather chair. New fellow, very polite, pays in cash, says he's from Seattle. And he doesn't know when to groan, Thorne said. There was a silence on the other end. Then Frank chuckled. Is that a sin now, Elias? He laughed at the red hymnal story, Frank. He laughed like he was trying to fit in. And then I laid a trap. I told him we buried the books. He agreed with me. You know we burned them. The humor vanished from Frank's voice. That's thin, Elias. That's very thin. Maybe the guy is just awkward. Maybe he's hard of hearing. It's not just that, Thorne pressed. It's the way he watches. He watches the congregation, not the service. He watches reactions. He mimics. It's like he's studying us. What's his name? Bill Tucker. Okay. Look, I can't open a file based on a bad sense of humor, but I can make a call. I can check the Seattle story. If he transferred a letter of membership, that church has to exist. Do it, Frank. Humor an old chaplain. All right, give me a day. But Elias? Yes? Don't go playing spy catcher. If this guy is what you think he is, which I doubt, he's trained to hurt people who get in his way. I'm just a shepherd, Frank, Thorne said. I just watch the sheep. Monday morning in Washington, D.C. is a flurry of activity. Bureaucrats flood into the city. The metro hums with the movement of the federal workforce. In the archives of the FBI, the request from Frank Holloway was low priority. It was a courtesy check. However, the beauty of the computer age was just beginning to dawn. The FBI had recently begun digitizing certain records, and they had access to databases that hadn't existed 5 years prior. An analyst named Sarah Jenkins pulled the query. William Tucker, Seattle, technical writer. She ran a check against the Social Security Administration Death Index. This was a standard procedure for catching benefit fraud, but it was also the primary way to catch ghost identities. The screen flickered green text. Tucker, William. Dobb, 05/12, 1943. ID, Boyce, ID. Status, deceased, 1947. Sarah stared at the screen. She blinked. She typed it again. Same result. The William Tucker living in Falls Church, Virginia, was using the Social Security number of a child who had died 36 years ago. The courtesy check instantly escalated to a Priority 1 counterintelligence lead. By 2 p.m. that Monday, Special Agent David Ross was standing in Frank Holloway's living room. Ross was young, sharp, and ambitious. He was part of the new breed of FBI agents, college-educated, focused on technology and psychology. You said your friend is a pastor? Ross asked, notebook in hand. Elias Thorne, Frank said. He's solid, not prone to flights of fancy. He was right, Ross said. The identity is a ghost. Classic Directorate S setup. We've been looking for a leak in the Northern Virginia area for months. We've had satellite data showing burst transmissions coming from that sector, but we couldn't pinpoint the house. We thought it was a diplomat. So what now? Frank asked. You go kick down his door. No, Ross said, his eyes narrowing. If we arrest him now, we get one spy. We send him home, they trade him for a dissident, and the game resets. If we watch him, we might find out who he's talking to. We might find his dead drops. We might find out who in the Pentagon is feeding him. You want to use the church, Frank realized. The church is his cover, Ross said. If we want to see who he really is, we have to let him keep playing the part. I need to talk to Reverend Thorne. The meeting took place on Tuesday night, in the rectory. It was raining, a cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the streets of Falls Church. Agent Ross arrived in a plumber's van to avoid suspicion. Thorne sat in his armchair listening as Ross laid out the reality of the situation. Mr. Tucker, or whatever his name is a colonel in the KGB, Ross said. We believe he is targeting defense contractors in your congregation. He's befriending them. looking for vulnerabilities. Thorne felt a sickness in his stomach. He's been to the potlucks. He's held Mrs. Higgins' baby. That's what they do, Reverend. They are parasites. What do you need me to do? Nothing, Ross said. Absolutely nothing. You treat him exactly as you did before. You shake his hand next Sunday. You smile. You ask him about his week. If you change your behavior by 1 degree, he will know. These men are human lie detectors. Thorne looked at his hands. You're asking me to lie, from the pulpit. I'm asking you to protect your flock, Reverend. If he spooks, he runs. If he runs, he might take sensitive information with him, or he might decide to eliminate the people who can identify him. Eliminate. He's a soldier, Reverend, behind enemy lines. If he feels cornered, he will fight. Thorne nodded slowly. I can do it, but I want one thing. What's that? I want to be there when you take him. I want him to see me. I want him to know that it wasn't the FBI that caught him. I want him to know it was the church. Ross hesitated, then nodded. If it goes down safely, we'll make that happen. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in psychological torture for Elias Thorne. Sunday after Sunday, he stood in the pulpit and preached the gospel of truth while looking into the eyes of a liar. He watched Bill Tucker sing Amazing Grace. He watched him put money in the offering plate. It was surreal. Tucker was the perfect congregant. He was helpful, attentive, and kind. But now, Thorne saw the mechanics of it. He saw how Tucker targeted the weak. One Sunday, during the coffee hour, Thorne watched from across the room as Tucker cornered young Mark Davison. Davison was a junior engineer at TRW, a defense contractor working on the satellite guidance systems. Davison's marriage was rocky. Everyone knew it. He looked tired and disheveled. Tucker approached him with a sympathetic smile. He touched Davison's shoulder. Thorne couldn't hear the words, but he could see the body language. The tilt of the head, the empathetic nod. I'm here for you. I understand. Let's grab a beer sometime. It was predatory. It was a wolf separating the sick sheep from the herd. Thorne wanted to scream. He wanted to march over there and throw Tucker out. But he held his ground. He sipped his coffee. He smiled at Mrs. Gable. Meanwhile, the FBI was tightening the net. They had installed cameras on the telephone poles outside Tucker's townhouse. They had tapped his phone. They had a team following him 24/7 in unmarked cars. They discovered his routine. On Tuesdays, he went to the grocery store. On Thursdays, he went to a park in Arlington. It was in the park that they found the dead drop. It was a hollowed-out rock near a footbridge. On a Thursday in early November, Tucker stopped to tie his shoe. In one fluid motion, he slid a small magnetic container under the bridge railing. The FBI agents waited for him to leave, then retrieved the container. Inside was a roll of microfilm. It contained photos of technical manuals for the Navy's new sonar array. The source was not Mark Davison. It was another man in the congregation, Robert Halloway, no relation to Frank, a logistics officer who had been complaining about his debts for months. Tucker had already turned him. Ross called Thorne. We have enough. He's active. He's transmitting stolen data. We're going to take him down. When? Thorne asked. Sunday, Ross said. We want to do it when he's least expecting it. He feels safe at church. It's his sanctuary. We're going to take that away from him. Sunday, November 13th, 1983. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening a storm. The atmosphere inside Grace Community Chapel was tense, though only one man knew why. Reverend Thorne felt the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. He had agreed to the FBI's plan, but it felt like a violation of the sanctity of the space. Yet, he reasoned, the violation had already occurred when the spy walked in. The FBI had infiltrated the choir. 2 agents, posing as new tenors, were in the loft. 3 more were in the vestibule, dressed as ushers. Outside, a tactical team was in a van parked down the street. Bill Tucker arrived at 9:50 a.m. He looked relaxed. He had successfully loaded the dead drop. He had received a signal from his handlers, a chalk mark on a mailbox, that the package was received and payment was waiting. He felt invincible. He took his seat in the 3rd row. Thorne began the service. He chose a hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." The congregation stood. The organ thundered, and though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us. Petrov sang the words. He felt the vibration of the music in the floorboards. He enjoyed the power of it. It was a good cover, this religion. It made people feel safe. Thorne stepped to the pulpit. He did not open his Bible. He looked directly at Bill Tucker. "Today," Thorne said, his voice quiet, amplifying the silence of the room, "I want to talk about truth." Petrov looked up. There was something different in the Reverend's tone. It lacked the usual warmth. It was cold, hard. "We come here to find truth," Thorne continued. "We come here to strip away the lies of the world, but sometimes the lies follow us in." Petrov shifted in his pew. "Is he talking about me?" "No, impossible. I am a ghost." "We have a visitor among us," Thorne said. "Someone who has been with us for months. Someone who has broken bread with us." The congregation began to look around, confused. Was this a welcome for a new member? "But this visitor," Thorne said, his eyes locking onto Petrov's, "does not know us. He thinks he does. He thinks he can learn our hearts by memorizing our hymns. But he failed the test." Petrov's heart stopped. The test, the red hymnal. "He laughed when he should have groaned," Thorne said. "He agreed to bury the past when we all know it was burned." The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. "Mr. Tucker," Thorne said, "or whatever your name is, the masquerade is over." Petrov stood up. It was a reflex. His fight-or-flight response kicked in. He looked at the exits. The ushers at the back doors locked them. The tenors in the choir loft stepped forward, reaching under their robes. Petrov looked at Thorne. There was no anger in the spy's face, only shock. The sheer audacity of it, to be outed from the pulpit. "Please remain seated," a voice boomed from the back. It was Agent Ross, stepping out of the shadows of the narthex. "Federal agents, everyone stay calm." The congregation gasped. A scream from Mrs. Gable. Children began to cry. Petrov looked at Ross, then at the side exit. He calculated the distance, 30 feet. He could make it. He was trained in Sambo combat. He could disable the deacon in the aisle. He tensed his muscles. "Don't do it, son," Thorne said from the pulpit. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. "Don't bring violence into this house, it's over." Petrov looked at the old preacher. He saw the sadness in Thorne's eyes. And in that moment, the conditioning cracked. The American mask fell away, and for a second, Valery Petrov stood there, a tired man in a tweed jacket who had been defeated not by a gun, but by a story about a hymnal. He raised his hands slowly. "I am unarmed," he said, his accent slipping, the Russian vowels elongating the words. Agents swarmed him. They cuffed him in the aisle, right next to where the collection plate sat. As they marched him out, he stopped for a brief second and looked back at Thorne. He nodded. A small, respectful nod. Game recognized game. They took him to a safe house in Maryland. The interrogation lasted for weeks. At first, Petrov said nothing. He requested the Soviet consulate. He claimed diplomatic immunity. But the FBI had the goods. They had the microfilms. They had the recordings. And they had the ghost identity. Agent Ross sat across from him. "We know about the red hymnal, Valery. We know you slipped up." Petrov smiled thinly. "The red hymnal. It is ironic. I studied your Constitution. I studied your baseball. I studied your tax code. But I did not study your bloopers. Culture isn't in the books, Valery," Ross said. "That's why you illegals always fail eventually. You can mimic the stats, but you can't mimic the soul." Petrov eventually cooperated. He was exchanged in 1985, on a bridge in Berlin, for 3 American pilots and a dissident poet. He returned to a Soviet Union that was beginning to crumble. He was given a medal, a pension, and a desk job instructing new recruits. His lesson to them was always the same. Do not try to be perfect. Perfection is suspicious, and never, ever fake a laugh. Chapter 11. The Aftermath in Oak Creek. Grace Community Chapel was never quite the same. The innocence was gone. The idea that a Soviet spy had sat in their pews, eaten their casseroles, and held their children was a trauma that took years to heal. Robert Holloway, the man Petrov had turned, was arrested 2 days later. He pleaded guilty to selling secrets and was sentenced to 20 years. His family moved away in shame. Reverend Thorne retired a year later. The event had aged him. He felt a deep sense of betrayal, not just by Petrov, but by the fact that his church had been used as a weapon of the Cold War. But he also felt a strange pride. The community had protected itself. Its shared history, its silly traditions, its shibboleths, had served as an immune system against the virus of deception. Years later, in the late 1990s, after the Berlin Wall had fallen and the Soviet Union was a memory, a former FBI agent named David Ross wrote a memoir. One chapter was titled The Sunday Spy. It detailed the case of Valery Petrov. It became a case study in counterintelligence training. It taught agents that surveillance wasn't just about cameras and microphones. It was about understanding the human terrain. Elias Thorne died in 2001. At his funeral, the church was packed. They sang, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." And when the current pastor told the story of the red hymnal, the funny, embarrassing story of the typo in 1968, the congregation groaned, a loud, collective, beautiful groan of shared memory. And in the back of the room, an old man in a gray suit stood up. It was Frank Holloway. He smiled, wiped a tear from his eye, and whispered, "Gotcha." The Cold War was fought with nukes and submarines and satellites. But sometimes the most important battles were won with nothing more than a keen eye, a gut feeling, and a congregational inside joke that no spy could ever truly understand.